This is Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Lauren Taylor. This is the Al Jazeera NewsHour, live from London. Coming up, Kuwait mourns the death of its emir, Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmad Al Sabah, who'd steered the country's foreign policy for more than 50 years. Azerbaijan and Armenia accuse one another of firing into each other's territory and reject pressure for peace talks over Nagorno-Karabakh. And hours before the first US presidential debate, Joe Biden releases his 2019 tax return and calls on President Trump to do the same.
I'm Sarah Khayat and I'll have all the sports. World number one Novak Djokovic begins his French Open campaign in impressive fashion. The Serbian star winning his first round match in straight sets. "40 days of mourning have been declared in Kuwait after the death of its emir at the age of 91. One of the most influential voices of the region, Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmad Al Sabah, was widely respected for his efforts to mediate conflicts there. He'd ruled the Gulf Arab state since 2006, but before that he steered Kuwait's foreign policy for decades as foreign minister. He'll be succeeded by his half-brother, the 83-year-old Crown Prince, who's due to be sworn in as the next emir on Wednesday.
The Crown Prince has always been known for his prudence, honesty, dedication and devotion to serve for the benefit of Kuwait and the Kuwaiti people, to be the best successor to the best ancestor.
Sheikh Sabah's body will arrive back in Kuwait on Wednesday from the United States, where he'd been in hospital following surgery in July. Jamal Al-Shayal looks back at his life.
In recent years, Sabah Al Ahmad Al Sabah had become recognized and relied on as a regional mediator. In 2017, when GCC member states Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, along with Egypt, accused Qatar of supporting what they described as terrorism and imposed a land, air and sea blockade, it was him who intervened. The Kuwaiti emir attempted to broker a settlement, urged for more dialogue between the Gulf rivals, and pushed for reforms to prevent future disputes.
We have discussed the situation in the country, foremost the unfortunate dispute between our brothers in the Gulf region, and our efforts to contain it.
Sheikh Sabah was born in Kuwait City in 1929, the son of Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah, who was emir from 1944 to 1950. For 4 decades he held the post of foreign minister. In that time, the oil-rich country experienced huge economic growth, but was also vulnerable to regional struggles. Although Kuwait had supported the Iraqi government during the nearly decade-long war with Iran in the 1980s, then President Saddam Hussein ordered his forces to invade Kuwait in 1990. More than 1,000 civilians were killed and hundreds went missing during the 7-month Iraqi occupation, which triggered the first Gulf War that same year. After a US-led air campaign forced Iraqi troops out of Kuwait, Sabah was closely involved in rebuilding his country, and in 2003 he was appointed Prime Minister. At the time, it was widely expected that his next role would be that of Crown Prince. But in 2006, then Emir Jabir al-Ahmad al-Jabir al-Sabah, his half-brother, died. A new emir, Saad al-Abdullah Salim al-Sabah, was sworn in. Almost immediately, concerns were raised over the state of his health and sparked what appeared to be a power struggle within the royal family. After a tense 9-day reign, the emir abdicated. The Kuwaiti cabinet swiftly nominated Sabah as the next leader, ending what was seen as a major crisis. In 2015, a suicide bomb exploded in a packed mosque in the east of Kuwait City, killing 26 people. The emir immediately rushed to the mosque despite security warnings, sharing his sympathy with the people. In the long life of Sabah Al Ahmad Al Sabah, he witnessed Kuwait's so-called golden years of economic growth and darker periods of conflict, regional turmoil and political crises. Towards the end, his well-honed skills in diplomacy and mediation were increasingly relied on by other Gulf states, a role he appeared to welcome, and one that will be missed.
United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres paid tribute to Sheikh Sabah and said he will remember his humanitarian contributions fondly.
I'm deeply moved by the information I just received of the passing of His Highness the Emir of Kuwait. The Emir of Kuwait was an extraordinary symbol of wisdom and generosity, a messenger of peace, a bridge builder, and I will never forget, as High Commissioner for Refugees, that I witnessed his initiative and his leadership in some of the most important humanitarian actions in the world.
The Emir of Qatar described him as a great leader, while Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said he was the big brother of the Palestinian people. He said Palestine has lost with his departure an Arab leader and a leader of humanity who spent his life in the service of his people, his nation and all humanity, and always stood by our national cause with our Palestinian people. Asad Beg in Tehran says Iran was one of the countries that benefited from the Emir's diplomacy.
Foreign Minister Javad Zarif has been the first Iranian official to respond to the death. He gave his condolences and he said that the Emir was an individual of moderation and equilibrium for Kuwait in the region, and he wished the people of Kuwait prosperity, stability and advancement for their new rule. And now Foreign Minister Javad Zarif did have a personal relationship with the late Emir. After the 2015 stampede in Saudi Arabia during the annual Hajj, many Iranians were killed. Now Iran wanted to send the officials to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had denied that. And Javad Zarif approached the Emir at the United Nations, after which it's thought that the Emir mediated between the two countries, and then the ministers, the health minister and the deputy foreign minister were allowed to travel to Saudi Arabia.
US President Donald Trump says he's deeply saddened by the Emir's passing, calling him an unwavering friend and partner. Alan Fisher has more on Sheikh Sabah's ties to the US.
A complicated relationship, not least because the Emir had built up a relationship with Iran, which didn't please many people here at the White House. He'd built up a relationship with China. He wasn't fully on board with Donald Trump when he pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. He spoke very strongly about the rights of Palestinian people. And so there was concern that perhaps the Kuwaitis were not being entirely loyal given what the US had done in the past. But there was respect for the man, because about 10 days ago, Donald Trump awarded him with the Legion of Merit, an honour that is only given by the president and normally only given to foreign leaders. That was presented for the first time in 1991 in his absence. So there'll be a lot of eyes on the White House to see how the relationship with Kuwait develops, not just after November the 3rd, the presidential election, of course, and whether or not there's a new incumbent in the building behind me, but also how the relationship with the new Emir develops and how it benefits both Kuwait and the United States.
Our senior political analyst, Marwan Bishara, joins us now via Skype from Paris. Marwan, what would you say was the legacy of the Emir?
Well, look, I think we can probably say three important things. One, balance, foreign policy that is balanced. Two, stability within the country and in the region. And three, reform. Since the Emir has served as foreign minister for some 40 years, he became quite a seasoned politician, quite a seasoned diplomat. And he was very careful after Kuwait suffered the invasion of Iraq to make sure that Kuwait always steers its way among regional powers and global powers. So he would find a balance between Saudi Arabia and Iran, between, say, the United States and China, as Alan Fisher was saying before from Washington. There aren't many sort of junior partners of the United States that dare chart a foreign policy that's not totally and utterly dependent on the United States. But the Emir of Qatar succeeded in doing that, somehow through a balanced foreign policy coupled with mediation among the various warring parties, whether in the region or outside it. I think that gave Kuwait a special role, if you will. Now, in terms of balance and continuity, he certainly ensured that within the country, the ruling family, in its relationship with the elected National Assembly, that there would be a sort of a mutual respect, if you will, with the division of labor. So the National Assembly played its role as the legislative body, and the ruling family played that of the executive. And I think that's kind of worked out for a while. Up and until there were some pressures for reform, and I think the Emir, in that sense, even before the Arab Spring started, began a reform within the country, allowing women to join the National Assembly as elected parliamentarians, even allowed for the first time the National Assembly to be questioning government officials. We even had 2 prime ministers quit because of the pressures of parliament on them. So there was a good division of labor that led to more stability within a very vibrant political process in the country. And now, last but not least, when the Arab Spring came, the Emir of Qatar was not exactly a champion, not even an admirer of the Arab Spring, because he thought that might lead to chaos. In some way it did. But he would not join the counter-revolutionary, if you will, the anti-Arab Spring forces, the likes of Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and he won't send forces to fight, and he won't support dictatorships. So in a sense, he kept on with the reform as well as with a balanced foreign policy.
And Marwan, the Emir's death is happening at a point where several Gulf nations have normalised relations with Israel, and it's a move that Kuwait had so far rejected. Will it be under pressure from the US to shift that position?
Absolutely. Well, there's lots of pressure, especially knowing that that Kuwait, like Oman, was for a while now going through a transition, that there will be a change on the top. Just like in Sudan, there is a transition. So the United States has been putting a lot of pressure on the more fragile regimes, trying to convince them through carrots and sticks, as it were, to normalize relations with Israel. But Kuwait, with a very vibrant public opinion, rejected that. Many Kuwaitis consider normalization as just a nicer way of saying surrender. They did not buy into the peace fakeness of it all. And hence the Kuwaitis remained both independent of that pressure from the United States and kept on insisting that without the creation of an independent Palestinian state on the occupied territories and for Israel to withdraw from Arab lands, Kuwait will maintain the status quo. That was pretty much a courageous position because, as we know, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, with the support of Saudi Arabia, have all moved towards normalization, but Kuwait kept its distance.
Marwan Mishara, thank you very much indeed. Well, joining us now from Doha is Omar Ashur, who's the founding director of the Critical Security Studies Programme at the Doha Institute. Thanks very much for being with us. So many decades of service and the role as a kind of a peace negotiator in the region. How different will his successor be?
Well, it's a legacy that is many would like to emulate, if you wish, and I believe that it will probably be more of a continuity of his legacy. The peacemaking, he was a peacemaker in many ways, intervened to mediate in the first diplomatic crisis in 2014 within between the Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The blockade crisis, we all know the mediating role and the de-escalating role of His Highness. We also know the exposure of that actually this crisis could have been escalated into a military invasion of some sort, and he mentioned this in the White House. Beside President Trump, which was, I guess, it is how he realized that warmongerism, based on the experience of Kuwait in 1990, 1991, that type of warmongerism need to be, in a way, deflated and de-escalated.
Yeah, just picking up on that, I just want to ask you. You mentioned the Kuwait, the invasion by Iraq of
of Kuwait. How much did that shape the national psyche, and the kind of the rest of the coming years?
I think part of the peacemaking effort, the insistence on collective Arab multilateral work within the GCC and the Arab League, the humanitarian effort by the Prince, and probably in the future policies of the current Prince of Kuwait. I think all of this has to do directly with what happened in 1990, 1991. The peacemaking here, there's basically the idea of another Saddam in the region, leading another Gulf country and trying to invade another, or trying to escalate a crisis from diplomatic to military. I think this was more or less confronted by the Prince Sabah, and probably that legacy will continue.
Just on to go back to the succession. So the new emir is going to be 83. Presumably that means that there's also some focus on who the crown prince will be and what their kind of positions on things will be.
Well, to a large degree, it will be my bet will be more continuity as opposed to change. A continuity of the legacy towards of the Emir Sabah, continuity towards the more or less mediating, peacemaking, and less of a change in the other direction, if this is what you're asking me. It could, let's say, a change in relationship with Israel or normalization. Could it happen? It could, because we're living in precarious times, and we've seen so many surprises in the last few years. But I think Marwan mentioned earlier that probably a change in that direction would be more or less very unpopular in Kuwait, both on the official level and on the people's level.
Omar Ashur, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us on Al Jazeera. Coming up on this NewsHour from London, the number of people killed by COVID-19 around the world passes 1 million, with infections still surging in many regions. Starving through lockdown, how pandemic restrictions have forced Filipino families into hunger. And in sport, Asian champions Qatar get ready for a unique footballing challenge. Sarah's here with that story. Armenia and Azerbaijan have accused one another of firing directly into each other's territory and rejected pressure to hold peace talks as 3 days of fighting threatens to turn into all-out war. In one incident, Armenia says Azeri ally Turkey shot down one of its fighter jets in its own airspace, a claim Turkey denies. The contested Nagorno-Karabakh area is at the heart of the standoff between the two neighbours. It's internationally recognised as part of Azerbaijan, but the majority of the population living in the red areas are ethnic Armenian, controlled by Armenian forces. These shaded areas are also recognised as Azeri territory, but controlled by Armenia. The small pockets in blue are controlled by Azerbaijan. The fighting is taking place on either side of a line of contact which separates armed forces from both countries. Robin Forestier-Walker has more from Tbilisi.
Soldiers and civilians are being flown to hospitals in Armenia's capital, Yerevan, from the conflict zone. Then the helicopters return to bring more wounded from Nagorno-Karabakh. But not everyone can be airlifted. Igor Gevorgian's son is fighting for his life in the regional capital, Stepanakert.
We took the children out so they could hide or run away, but we failed. One of my family members, my 9-year-old daughter, was killed either by artillery or a bomb dropped by them. My little boy is seriously injured. My wife is in hospital. She is also injured.
Dozens of people have been killed and hundreds injured since fighting began on Sunday. Azerbaijan says it is taking back towns and territory held by Armenia since 1994. Armenian forces say they are holding their ground.
The most important thing is we are brave, fearless, and we will go forward.
We captured a lot of Azeri military equipment, and we continue to fight against them using their own equipment. We do well with this.
All the while, civilian men are signing up for duty in Azerbaijan's capital, Baku, just as they are in Yerevan.
By order of our president, people have gathered for a partial mobilization, which means that it concerns men under the age of 32 and those who are considered suitable for us by their profession.
On Tuesday, Armenia claimed that a Turkish F-16 fighter jet had shot down an Armenian plane 60 kilometers inside Armenian airspace. Baku and Ankara both swiftly denied that allegation, but if true, it would be a worrying new development. Turkey has already said it's prepared to help Azerbaijan on the battlefield, and the risk is that Russia could be brought into the fighting because Armenia is part of the Moscow-led CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and any attack on a single member state can be considered an attack against all. France is calling an urgent meeting with Russia and the US to find a path to de-escalation. The three have mediated the dispute in the past. This is the most intense fighting between the two countries since the 1990s, and so far the international community seems powerless to stop it. Robin Forestier-Walker, Al Jazeera, Tbilisi.
The current flare-up is the latest of several deadly confrontations that have plagued Nagorno-Karabakh for decades. It's left hundreds of Azeris displaced over that time, unable to return to areas now controlled by Armenia. But as Sinem Koslio reports from Baku, many still hope they will one day return.
Mehmet Muradov has been using these crutches for years. He was injured after stepping on a landmine while defending his village in Azerbaijan's Fuzula district against Armenia's occupation in 1991. He lost a foot and a home. Since then, Mehmet and his siblings have been displaced and living in this dormitory from the Soviet era near the capital Baku. There are at least 100 other displaced families here.
Azerbaijan's army was just being established back then. We had to defend ourselves, but we didn't have any weapons. But Russia armed Armenians. We had farms, animals back home. And I had a dream to be a diplomat, but it didn't happen.
Mehmet's brother Nusret is also a veteran. In 1992, he was hit by a bullet on his right arm, which is now 6 centimeters shorter than his left. Yet he survived another battle with Armenia in 1994 with 2 fragments in his skull. He's now dependent on medication. Muradov's sister Gülhar says she's devoted her life to serving her brothers.
They are not only brothers to me, but also good patriots. I wish I could be home again.
It's been nearly 30 years for the Azeri Turks of Nagorno-Karabakh that they were displaced and moved into these dormitories, but it has never felt like home for them, and the conflict has never left their minds. Emotions are running, and many hope that they might be able to return to their lands that were occupied by Armenian forces.
The current escalation we should consider from the new military doctrine, Armenian military doctrine, adopted and declared in March 2019, when Minister of Defense of Armenia David Tanayan declared that Armenia advances idea of new war for new territories.
The conflict with Armenian rebels in 1992 was the first open war between the two ex-Soviet republics, Armenia and Azerbaijan. The war killed more than 30,000 people and displaced hundreds of thousands. It ended in 1994 with a shaky, Russia-brokered truce, but there have been incidents of fighting since then. The most recent was last July. For now, Mehmet says he awaits for the day that he can go back to his ancestral region and its beautiful mountains. Sinem Kösoğlu, Al Jazeera, Baku, Azerbaijan.
Donald Trump and his challenger for the presidency, Joe Biden, will go head-to-head for the first time in less than 4 hours in the election campaign's opening televised debate. And Biden is putting pressure on Trump after recent revelations about his taxes. releasing his own tax returns. The Democrat showed he paid just more than $346,000 in tax last year and received nearly $47,000 in refunds. His party is now urging the president to do the same after the New York Times reported Trump paid just $750 in federal taxes in 2016 and 2017 and none at all in 10 of the previous 15 years. John Hendren joins us from outside the debate centre in Cleveland, Ohio. So what are we expecting tonight in Cleveland?
Well, I think from Donald Trump, we can expect some fireworks. He's the one who's behind in the polls, and the conventional wisdom is that he's the one who's going to have to do something special here in order to move those polls. For Joe Biden, we can expect him to strike back a couple times, but generally I think he's going to want to present himself as a statesman, somebody who's going to be the grown-up in the room when Donald Trump is tossing verbal bombs. So we definitely have that. We also have the introduction of taxes by Joe Biden, who released his taxes today, made a little less than $1 million in 2019, and paid about 30% of that, about $300,000 in taxes. That gives him the opportunity to say to Donald Trump, I did this, and now it's time for you to do the same. So there were originally 6 topics to be discussed here, all of them picked by the host, Fox News' Chris Wallace. They included the records of the candidates, the Supreme Court and the opening coming up, the COVID-19 pandemic, the economy, race and violence in the cities, and integrity in the election. But that 7th topic will likely be taxes. That was introduced by the New York Times when they dropped this bombshell report saying that Donald Trump in 2016 and 2017 paid just $750 each year in taxes and paid no taxes in 10 of the 15 years that were discussed. And if you want to know, or that were examined there, if you want to know just how much bickering we could have here, well, it's already started before the debate. The Trump campaign put out a news release saying that Biden had originally agreed to have an inspection of whether they had, each of the candidates had an earpiece where somebody would be giving them the answers. Biden denies that he had ever agreed to that. And Trump also accused Biden, or asked Biden to take a drug test. The Biden campaign blew that one off pretty much. And Trump also said that his campaign said that Biden had asked for multiple breaks. Biden, of course, denies that. So the bickering has begun even before the debate has begun.
And in terms of COVID-19, how is it different, this particular debate for the conditions at the moment?
Well, more than ever, these candidates are going to be talking to an audience through the television. That's because in that arena behind me, which was briefly a 1,000-bed COVID-19 hospital, there will only be 80 people because of the social distancing rules. The candidates won't be shaking hands. Everybody, in order to get in there, or even indeed out here, had to take a COVID test. That includes us reporters, and that's why you get this gray armband to ensure that things are safe in there. But more than anything, what's going to be different this year around is that COVID-19 will be topic number 1. It's 3rd on the list, but Biden is likely to bring it up in every single question when it comes to the economy. It is the coronavirus that has caused the economy to tank. When it comes to so many other things, it is the coronavirus that is going to be the topic that Biden brings up, and it's the number 1 thing he plans to use to show that Donald Trump is simply the wrong man for the job and that Biden needs to get that job in January.
John Hendren, thank you very much. Well, the first live televised presidential debate took place in 1960 between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, and they've produced some memorable moments over the years.
I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
So, Joe, there you go again, pointing backwards again, though. You prefaced your whole comment with the Bush administration. Now, doggone it.
I went to a number of women's groups and said, can you help us find folks? And they brought us whole binders full of women.
But what we want to do is to replenish the Social Security Trust Fund by making sure that we...
Well, Ed Lee is the Senior Director of the Barclay Forum for Debate, Deliberation and Dialogue at Emory University. He joins us via Skype from Atlanta. Thanks very much for being with us. So in the past, these events have been relatively civil. What kind of tone do you expect this time round?
I expect the tone to be one that speaks to the moment, that at the current moment, we have a lot of people who are unemployed. We have a tremendous number of people who are sequestered in their homes, and that the goal will be to speak to the plight of those particular people. And I think that that will come from the Biden campaign, as you alluded to, will constantly speak to coronavirus as a part of the conversation. But I also think that in talking about the economy and featuring that the Donald Trump campaign and the Donald Trump's performance will also speak to the urgency of now.
Tell me, debates can be dangerous, can't they, for candidates? What are the potential pitfalls for each of them?
I think that one of the pitfalls for Donald Trump has to do with the fact that there are only 80 people in the audience, that he is someone who feeds off of the energy of the audience, of the people who are there. And he is actually pretty brilliant at reading what the tone is of the environment that he's in and what the audience needs from him, that there's not a lot of messages that are being sent amongst those 80 people. And I fear from his behalf on the campaign that he will get bored, he will be seen as lethargic, that it would look like he was stressed because he doesn't have that energy that's there. From the Biden perspective, one of the dangers that I think is that he's over-prepared for the moment. He has spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about this particular debate, and I fear that it will come to be robotic, that it would come to be a performance that doesn't come across as connecting with the audience because it is something that feels as if it's rehearsed.
Just on that, I mean, presumably, as we mentioned earlier, that some of the topics would have been known about in advance, and then at the last minute, this tax issue has come up. Does the tax issue change the game at all, do you think?
I think that it gets filtered through the notion of the economy, that if I strongly believe that if I am Donald Trump, I want this conversation to be about the economy, and that he'll go back to the 2016 playbook where he was the economic populist that talked about how trade deals decimated the economies in what is identified as the flyover part of the country, middle America, and how Clinton and the various Clintonites were unprepared to tend to the needs of folks who spent most of their lives in the manufacturing industry. I think that same line of argument could be used in order to speak to some of the dangers of a Biden administration. But I also think that is an argument that can be used to help address some of the concerns that people have about the lack of tax payments that he has. That when Biden wants to talk about taxation, I think that he should quickly pivot to the conversation around trade, unemployment, and jobs.
And just briefly, how much do these debates generally change people's minds or affect how they vote?
They really do. That one of the interesting things about this year's election is that some of the data indicates that there are over 1 million people who have already voted. That this time 4 years ago, we were at about 10,000 people. So there's an increasing number of people who are already registering their votes. I think that it speaks to the critical nature of this moment, that this may be the last time that these candidates have the opportunity to speak to a collection of people who are undecided, but also to speak to a collection of people who can be encouraged to turn out to vote at this particular moment. Then unfortunately, we have a large number of people who choose not to vote in the United States. And ultimately, I do think that these debates and how media like yourselves and others portray what goes on in the debates will inform both who people choose and whether they choose to participate.
Ed Lee, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you can watch the debate right here on Al Jazeera later on from 1 GMT on Wednesday. Lots more still to come this hour, including they're the lucky ones. Asylum seekers whose camp was burnt down finally make it to the European mainland. Angry protests at the brutal death of yet another young woman in India. And in sport, the Grand Slam first-timer making an impact at the French Open. A reminder of the top stories here on Al Jazeera. 40 days of mourning have been declared across Kuwait following the death of its emir, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Sabah, who's died in the US at the age of 91. His 83-year-old half-brother, the Crown Prince, will be sworn in as his successor on Wednesday. Azerbaijan and Armenia have accused one another of firing directly into each other's territory during a third day of fighting over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. Their leaders have also rejected pressure to hold peace talks. And Democratic presidential challenger Joe Biden has released his tax returns and called on Donald Trump to do the same ahead of their first televised debate. The two will go head-to-head in Cleveland, Ohio in 3.5 hours. Now, it was on December the 31st last year that China alerted the World Health Organization to a mysterious illness spreading in the city of Wuhan. 11 days later, a 61-year-old man in the city was the first to die. Now, 9 months on, the coronavirus has claimed more than 1 million lives, a milestone the head of the United Nations has called mind-numbing. 1 in 5 of those deaths has been recorded in the US, the worst-hit country. It's seen more than 7 million cases, partly because it has the capacity to test and identify more than many other nations. Brazil has now reported more than 140,000 deaths and nearly 5 million infections, while 96,000 people in India have succumbed out of more than 6 million confirmed cases. Latin America is the worst affected region in the world, with 9.2 million confirmed coronavirus cases. Well, that's being attributed to several factors, including poor government measures, inequality, and a lack of healthcare resources. Leaders in some nations, most notably Brazil and Mexico, have flouted public health guidelines, and virus restrictions have been ineffective in many areas due to overcrowded living conditions and informal employment. Well, Miguel Lago is the Executive Director of the Institute for Health Policy Studies in Rio de Janeiro. He explains why many countries in Latin America have failed to use their health resources effectively.
Yeah, I think there are 3 main reasons for the region to become the biggest victim of the COVID-19. The first one is the fact that the region is the most unequal region of the world, and inequalities, social and economic inequalities, are directly linked to health outcomes. So it's harder to do a lockdown, it's harder to do hygiene policies. The second biggest challenge concerns the state capacity, and especially public health systems. So we have a region with more often fragile health systems, very fragmented health systems. Then you have the third problem, which is leadership. So you have a government that does not believe in science, does not believe in evidence-based policies, and only looking at how to increase its popularity.
Governments across Europe are considering new measures to curb a resurgence in virus cases. In the United Kingdom, more than 7,000 infections were reported on Tuesday, the highest daily rise the country's seen. But like elsewhere, it's been partly put down to more testing. More localised lockdowns are also being ordered across the continent, with Germany considering restrictions on parties. Chancellor Angela Merkel warns that without action, there could be more than 19,000 new cases a day.
If things continued over the next 3 months, October, November, December, then we could rise to over 19,000 cases per day. What I want to convey is that this is the nature of an exponential rise. If the doubling time remains the same, it leads to very high numbers. This underlines the urgency for us to act.
Hundreds of people have protested outside Israel's parliament against lockdown restrictions and a possible ban on demonstrations. Police say at least 3 people were arrested. Politicians have been debating a measure that could outlaw weekly rallies against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The government imposed a second nationwide lockdown earlier this month in a bid to halt the spread of the virus. Coronavirus restrictions in South Africa have contributed to the loss of 2 million formal jobs across the country. That's the biggest fall on record for Africa's most industrialised economy. The workforce shrank after President Cyril Ramaphosa ordered a strict lockdown to curb the spread of the disease in March. But the number of those considered economically inactive also swelled by 5 million to almost 21 million people over a 3-month period. That means they were unable to look for employment because of the restrictions. Well, the pandemic has also led to massive job losses in the Philippines. Many are going hungry as the country struggles with its first recession in nearly 30 years. Jamila Olendogan reports from the capital, Manila.
Ramboy Panganiban says his family feels lucky if they are able to eat 3 times a day. He used to earn an equivalent of $6 a day selling food, but now he says he's happy if he's able to bring home 4.
We've been hungry since March. In the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, we finished off the very little cash we had. And since we couldn't really go out to work, we just borrowed money.
Many people here are in a similar position. They used to be part of what the government calls the informal sector. They are either self-employed or run businesses providing goods and services. But now they tell us many people here have lost their jobs, and some have resorted to begging. And it isn't happening in the capital, Manila, alone. Local survey shows at least 7 million families have experienced hunger at least once in the past 3 months. That's a record high of more than 30%, the highest incidence of hunger since 2014. The survey comes as the country is well into its 7th month of community quarantine, one of the longest ever implemented by a government in the world. The Philippine government imposed a lockdown when the coronavirus pandemic broke out. But it pushed the country into one of its worst economic recessions in decades. The government says it is doing the best it can. It has given out cash to millions of Filipinos and says it hopes to give more.
Kaya nga po tayong nagbubukas ng ekonomiya.
We are saddened about this. That is why we are reopening the economy to restart jobs and to generate more income for those most affected.
But others say more could be done.
There has been permanent damage done to livelihood, to jobs, and there needs to be a more sustained response to this problem. I think we need to dispel that notion that there isn't enough funding. There is funding. It's just not being used in the more appropriate interventions. There is enough funding for infrastructure projects of local politicians.
This is a community inside one of the country's top business districts. People here tell us life has always been difficult, but now they fear it is getting worse. Jamila Alindogan, Al Jazeera, Manila.
Greece has begun to move thousands of refugees off its eastern Aegean islands in an effort to ease simmering tensions. Many have been stranded there for several years, unable to travel to the mainland or further into Europe. But a fire at Moria camp on the island of Lesbos reinvigorated efforts to help them move on. John Soropoulos reports from the port of Lario near Athens.
The people on board this ferry have been waiting for this moment for a long time. They're among thousands of refugees on Greece's East Aegean islands who received asylum months ago and haven't been allowed onto the mainland because there wasn't enough accommodation for them. After a fire destroyed Europe's biggest refugee camp on Lesbos earlier this month, the government decided to move them. It started with the most vulnerable, unaccompanied minors, and is now moving those who've received asylum. This Kuwaiti Bedouin has been in Greece for nearly 2 years. 8 months ago, he and his 2 sons received asylum. Now that he's on mainland Europe, he doesn't plan to stay in Greece.
They will go to school now?
Yes.
Learn Greek?
The Greek.
Will you stay in Greece?
No. Go Germany. Germany, come here.
These 2 Rohingya families have traveled across Asia. They too intend to leave for Germany, where a mentally handicapped child can receive care.
And you will all go together?
Only German.
Can you tell me, what's your job? What work do you do?
No job, I do no job. No job. This crazy. This crazy.
In theory, refugees who are granted asylum are free to fend for themselves. In Greece, with unemployment at 15% and few integration programs, it's almost impossible to do. So the International Organization for Migration is putting these people up in hotels for 2 months. After that, their apartment rentals will be subsidized.
The decongestion of the island is a dynamic procedure which had started a few months ago. After the fire in Moria, there are more collective efforts from the competent authorities in order for all eligible people to be transferred from the Greek islands to the mainland.
These are the lucky refugees who've survived dangerous crossings overland and sea crossings, and that alone has taken them years to reach the European mainland and receive asylum. And they have years to go before they learn European languages and skills and finally integrate themselves into the workforce. The government has drawn down island refugee populations by 40% since the beginning of the year, but 23,000 remain there. The government says it plans to move all of them to the mainland by Christmas, but it hasn't said where they will go or how it will help them begin their lives. John Psaropoulos, Al Jazeera, Lavrio.
Britain and Canada have imposed travel bans and asset freezes on Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, his son and other officials. They accuse the government of rigging the August election and committing violence against protesters. It came hours after opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya met the French president during a visit to Lithuania. She says Emmanuel Macron promised to help negotiate the release of political prisoners detained during weeks of demonstrations. Lukashenko was sworn in for a sixth term last week, despite widespread international condemnation. Afghanistan's top peace negotiator says it's time to end suspicion and stale rhetoric between his country and Pakistan. Abdullah was on his first visit to Pakistan in 12 years and met the foreign and prime ministers. It comes as a government negotiating team tries to broker a peace agreement with the Taliban at talks in Qatar. Pakistan's role in current negotiations with the Taliban was part of their discussions. Abdullah told Al Jazeera both sides want a resolution.
Peace in Afghanistan, peace in Pakistan, peace in the region is important for all of us. And most of the talks that I had here in Islamabad yesterday and today, and will continue through tomorrow, will be focused on how we can support the negotiations which are there in peaceful efforts. At the same time, what are the steps that we can take as far as strengthening the bilateral relations? Of course, there has been mistrust in the past. There will be, still we are not there, and we should raise all issues and put it on the table and find the common way forward, a solution which works in the best interest of all sides, in the people of Afghanistan first and foremost. So it will take time before we will get there, but both sides have shown that they are ready to talk. As far as the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan is concerned, we are determined to be patient and to continue our efforts.
A woman in India has died 2 weeks after she was raped by a group of men in the latest case to draw widespread anger. Hundreds of people gathered outside the New Delhi hospital where the victim was being treated to demand justice. Thousands of women are raped every year in India, and a number of deaths have sparked similar protests. The 19-year-old was from the lowest rank of India's caste system. Police say all 4 men accused of the attack have been arrested.
I request the government to punish the accused and give justice to my daughter. They should be hanged.
There is outrage in the entire country. The more the chief minister is negligent in making decisions, the more dangerous the consequences will be. The victim's family is not alone. We are with the family.
The human rights group Amnesty International is stopping all operations in India because of what it calls a witch hunt. The organisation says India's government is freezing its bank accounts, and it's been put under pressure because of its work on violence in Delhi and Indian-administered Kashmir. The government has accused Amnesty of breaking the law by illegally receiving foreign funds. Wildlife officials in Zimbabwe think they found what caused the deaths of dozens of elephants. 30 of the animals were found lying on their stomachs last month, suggesting a sudden death. Analysis suggests a bacterial disease was responsible after examinations found inflamed organs. Earlier this year, hundreds of elephants were found dead in Botswana from a type of bacterial poisoning. Still ahead this news hour. Fans of the Tampa Bay Lightning hockey team celebrate their team's title success from a distance. That's in sport with Sarah. And the real-life Ironman. Fact meets science fiction as UK paramedics try out brand new jetpack technology. Now here's Sarah with the sport.
Thanks a lot, Lauren. Well, world number one Novak Djokovic has booked his spot in the second round of the French Open. The 2016 winner was, however, on the receiving end of what's arguably been the shot of the tournament so far. Now on to football, where Tottenham have booked a spot in the quarter-finals of the English League Cup. They beat Chelsea 5-4 on penalties to get there, having scored a late equaliser to force the shootout. It's a boost to Jose Mourinho's side, who's had a disappointing start to the EPL campaign, winning just one game from 3. Now, Asian champions Qatar now know the task they'll be facing as guest entrants at next year's Gold Cup. Qatar have been drawn with Honduras, Panama and Grenada for the tournament involving countries from North and Central America. Qatar is getting ready to play in their first World Cup, where the country hosts that event in 2022. Now, the Tampa Bay Lightning have beaten the Dallas Stars to win the National Hockey League Stanley Cup. It was the last act in a season that at one point looked quite unlikely to finish, as Farah Ismail explains in this report.
The famous old trophy and fireworks were all in place for the end of the National Hockey League season. But the fans were still missing. The Tampa Bay Lightning lifting the Stanley Cup with only themselves for company.
I'm at loss for words. You obviously wish your family and fans could be here, but we felt the support from back home, and I don't know, it's so many emotions at the same time. It's tough to describe.
To the point, but it's After 2 months of hockey and biosecure bubbles in Canada, the Dallas Stars had to win Game 6 to extend their stay in isolation. But luck didn't seem to be on their side. The Lightning struck in the first period. Braden Point with the goal. Blake Coleman added a second, and his team were on their way to their first Stanley Cup win since 2004.
Tampa Bay Lightning have won the Stanley Cup!
It's always the best moment of our hockey lives, but so many emotions. It's not going to be able to. It's going to take months, maybe, for it to sink in. But we're going to be champions forever.
Tampa's fans were left celebrating thousands of kilometers away in a different country. The league is yet to decide if fans will be allowed to witness the action in person next season. Farah Ismail, Al Jazeera.
Now, staying with American football, and quarterback Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs has hit another career milestone. In his team's 34-20 win over the Baltimore Ravens, Mahomes reached 10,000 passing yards in just 34 games. And that's an NFL record, by the way. Now, in this game, he threw 4 touchdown passes and also completed a rushing touchdown for the reigning Super Bowl champions.
We honestly have a new game plan from top down every single week, and that goes with the preparation that our coaches have. Coach Reed, Coach Bieniemy, Coach Kafka, Coach Gilu, all those guys, Coach McCullough, they do a great job of really scouting out and giving us a great game plan so that we can go out there and execute at a high level.
Well, that's all your sports updates for me for now. We'll have more for you later. Back to you, Lauren, in London.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Now, fact is meeting science fiction in a remote region of northern England, where rescue teams are trying out a revolutionary jetpack. In a scene straight out of the Hollywood movie Iron Man, a test pilot travelled from the bottom of a valley to a simulated casualty site in just 90 seconds. It's a journey that would take a paramedic 25 minutes on foot. Trials in the Lake District are still at an early stage, but mountain rescuers are excited by the new technology's potential.
The whole thing worked beautifully well. I think both teams came away from that feeling that, actually, as kind of far out and as extreme as this sounds, it is actually a possibility.
And that's it from me, Lauren Taylor. Before I go, a quick reminder, you can always catch up with our website. The address of that is aljazeera.com. You can watch us there live by clicking on the orange icon. I'll be back in a minute with more news. Bye for now.